Do you mind if I just jump right into it with you?
Go right ahead.
All right. So, as you know, the podcast, I've named it The Big Questions. And so I feel it important to start it off with probably the most important question of all. Who are you?
I'm Hedin Daubenspeck. I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm a practicing CPA. I'm a mystic. I've been on my path over 40 years and currently writing my first book.
Awesome. That was like did you rehearse that? That was perfect. It was like a soundbite. It was just perfect, right? All right. So you've told me your name. You've told me a little bit about yourself and what you do for a living, but you still haven't told me who you are.
Well, I'm a father and a grandfather. That's important. I grew up on the farm in Oklahoma, living close to nature. I was born psychic, and I was very spiritual and connected with nature, and I've never lost that connection. My mother was psychic, and I think maybe it came down in the family genetically to me. I I learned my religious education young in life on the farm with my family, and it was kind of disorienting, a little confusing, and it's something I had to learn, and then later in life kind of unlearn, so that I could have more of an open mind and not be so judgmental.
Yeah. So in the early chapters of your book, as I was reading it, it became clear to me that you had this sort of conflicting relationship with spirituality due to your upbringing in what was the community that you were coming up in?
It was a Protestant Christian church.
Right. And then on the other hand, you had these sort of very direct experiences, mystical experiences through nature and through other things. And so you kind of had a conflict between these two sets of ideas, right?
I did have a conflict. And when I was 13, I had a numinous experience, which helped me find the path of knowing that God's within and that he's not sitting up on the throne in the sky somewhere. And I felt a personal connection.
All right. And do you mind talking about that experience? What exactly triggered it, and what was it like for you?
Well, I was out riding a horse bareback in the pasture. And the pasture was covered with wildflowers, and they were purple, and the fragrance rose up from the meadow to my nostrils, and I could smell the fragrance and the rhythm of the horse and the wind and the sunshine. And I just had a experience of awe, an experience of wonder. It was a feeling of ecstasy. And I knew that God was present in nature. I knew God was present in me. And I realized that the teachings of duality and that God is separate had to be false, at least from my point of view. And at that moment, I understood non-duality, even though I never heard the word. At that moment, I found oneness.
Wow, that's amazing. And
Yes, I was 13 years old.
Wow, holy! So you've felt that, and then that feeling you said has never left you. You've always felt that connection.
I have grown from there. It stimulated a great desire to understand the wisdom of the world, because I wanted to understand all the wisdom that the world could bestow upon me.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. What a crazy thing to happen to you, hey? I mean, and essentially, how many times have you done similar things before then? Like, how many times had you been out on the pasture riding your horse bareback in spring? Was that the first time, or had you done that many times before?
Well, I had certainly rode horses, but the combination of the fragrance from the wildflowers and the wind and the sun and the horse in that moment came together to excite me in a state of ecstasy that I'd never had that experience before. That was the first time.
Wow. And you called it a numinous experience? Is that the term you used?
Numinous is a term. If you walk into a cathedral, maybe you'll feel a sense of awe. Maybe you'll get goosebumps. See, that's a numinous experience. When you're in a holy place and that feeling of reverence, that's a numinous experience. When you're present with God, you feel that numinous experience.
Wow, yeah, that's remarkable. And it's funny that you draw that, again, that same comparison or that same dichotomy between your sort of formal religious upbringing and then your true spiritual experience of oneness, right? Because you're talking about going in a cathedral. Well, you had that same experience out in the pasture riding a horse. You were one with nature, right?
Nature is intelligent.
I agree.
Nature is divine. Nature is the creative expression of the divine feminine.
Mhm.
The divine masculine had the idea, and the divine feminine created the world.
Right.
And in our journey to reach androgynous mastery, we have to balance our divine feminine and our divine masculine so that we're walking in the center path, neither to the left and neither to the right, but following with balance, compassion, understanding.
Yeah, that's quite the challenge, I think, for especially a lot of males in our society, because we're sort of conditioned and brought up to view the feminine as, weaker or inferior. And so to tell a guy that there is an aspect of the feminine in him and that he is actually, repressing this part of him that is a very important part, it's a challenge to get that message across.
Well, I was a single father for a number of years with 4 children. I had to be nurturing and I had to be strong, and I had to balance those energies. And if you think about it, intuition's feminine.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be in the receptive mode to receive intuition, and the feminine is the receptive mode.
Yeah.
So if you're not developing the feminine, then you're shut off from spirit.
Yeah, and again, that's another dichotomy that I always am contemplating, is this sort of opposition of reason to intuition, and the way we sort of are taught to use one and repress the other, or to validate the findings of the one and not the other, which is very interesting to me, because in my experience, they work best when they are going hand in hand, not when they're being, one is being valued over the other. So,
well, when you enter the secular education system, they begin to teach the worldly knowledge, and they tend to suppress the spiritual awareness. Then you enter the university, and the academic environment is reason, and they suppress spirituality. You can gain a wonderful education academically, but you really don't gain wisdom until you go within.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Couldn't agree with you more. That was my experience. I mean, did you go to college and university at all, or?
Well, I have 19 years of education.
Okay, yeah, so firsthand then what you're saying is true.
The last 3 years was working on my master's at the University of Philosophical Research in Los Angeles.
Wow.
And I was working on my master's in consciousness studies.
And so based on the topic of your studies, would you still stand by your statement that you just made about the sort of the Western model of education, if you will, that it's all sort of in your head and there's very little to be said about the heart or the spirit?
Well, in my 3 years working on my master's in consciousness studies, I learned a lot of facts about consciousness. I did not hear one single syllable about how to awaken consciousness.
Very interesting.
And my life's about helping people awaken consciousness.
Yeah, well, and what a life goal. I mean, your work will never be done, so you always have something to look forward to, right?
Yes, it's never. I say I'll come back 1,000 more lifetimes.
Yeah. That's a good way to look at it. I mean, what's isn't there some kind of Eastern term for that? Like somebody that is awakened but chooses to keep coming back over and over again?
Well, the Buddha has 2 paths. They can go the singular path and not return and self-develop. Or they can take the loving path and keep returning to help others.
Yeah.
Those are the 2 choices for the Buddha.
Right. Yes, the awakened one.
There's a name for them, but
yeah.
I don't know the name.
Yeah. Sometimes the actual word itself isn't that important, right? I mean, it's just the idea
Well,
that.
it's some Sanskrit word that
Mm,
I'd have to have a dictionary.
yeah. No, there's a lot of that in Eastern philosophy too, right? One of the things that struck me reading about the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, not reading them directly, but reading about them, was all the technical terms that these people had for different things that we just have one word for. Like instead of talking about mind, they had all these different aspects of mind labeled, and it's very interesting that they were mapping all of this out thousands of years ago.
Well, to put it in perspective, the Hindu religion's at least 10,000 years old.
Mm-hmm.
They have devoted 10,000 years to the study of the mind and to the psyche. No other dogma even comes close. They have terms like existence, consciousness, bliss.
Mm.
They have deities representing attributes of God like Brahma for creativity, Shiva, the destroyer, or Krishna, who's the peacemaker. They have words like Rudra in the Vedas, who is the terrifying one that comes to destroy ignorance. See, the Hindu is the most beautiful religion on earth. And Buddhism is built upon the foundation of Hinduism.
Yes.
Buddha himself was a Hindu.
Or he grew up in a Hindu culture and surrounded by all of these sort of ideas and beliefs, right?
Those were his beliefs. Mm-hmm. Now, he became a Buddha, but he didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Very true. There are a lot of parallels, even when they disagree, I feel like it's a pretty minor disagreement. Like, is there a self? Is there not a self? At the end of the day, whatever we agree on, we're still going to have to do our lives. We're still going to have to live our lives the same way. So a lot of these disagreements between Hinduism and Buddhism seem to be moot points to begin with.
Well, they're fairly minor. They both have the same bedrock.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty amazing too, because I read somewhere that, if you look at sort of the progress of religion in the West, you find that one is overtaken by the next, and then the next is overtaken by a new one. Whereas in India, from what I understand, instead of replacing, they just absorbed the new into the old, and it just became part of this continuous tradition.
Well, let me think a second. Let's take a look at China. When you think about religion and the Tao, in China, over the thousands of years, religion has changed from being a religion to being their philosophy. In the West, we have a religion, but it's not our philosophy. In China, their religion is their philosophy. In India, an 8-year-old child learns meditation. In America, a 12-year-old boy in India knows more than a 60-year-old preacher in America.
That's hilarious. Yeah, well, knows in the sense of experiential knowledge, not intellectual knowledge.
Knowing in the way of the inner self.
That's right. Yeah, and that's another thing that always seems to come up is this idea of knowing something intellectually and then actually experiencing it firsthand, and the difference between the two. Because it's one thing to say that you know something, and it's another thing to experience it, to go, oh, now I really know.
What I'm finding among young people and even older people is that the church isn't doing it for them. Yeah. They're looking for a personal inner experience to feel that inner movement to satisfy them that the divine exists.
Right.
Just hearing the words in church is not doing it. They're searching for some kind of inner experience.
Right.
And if you look at addicts, alcoholics, drug addicts, they're searching for God. They're wanting that buzz. They're wanting that experience. They're just using a method that's kind of artificial.
Right. Well, and the experience that you're referring to is the experience that you had in the pasture, isn't it? That bliss, that euphoria, that feeling of oneness. I can definitely see how addicts are looking for that.
Well, that's exactly right.
Give me 1 second there. I'm sorry. Evangeline, get out and close the door behind you, please. Thank you. Bye-bye.
No.
Give me a kiss. Okay, now leave, please. I asked you nicely not to interrupt me. You've already interrupted me once. Close the door behind you. Love you.
Ollie, I think she would be a wonderful addition. I could start speaking at her level.
All right, I'll bring her back. If she comes back, we'll let her hang out.
Well, you know, children learn from fables.
Yeah.
Some of the greatest truths are in myths and fables. The children intuitively know that. It's in their subconscious mind. They understand princes and kings and princess. They're ahead of us. They've got it.
Well, and there's a reason all these scriptures talk about, I think Jesus talks about it as well, about how the children inherit the kingdom, right? And the innocence and the wisdom of babes and all that kind of stuff. I mean, they're closer to the origin than we are, and they're still, I think in some ways, they're still aware of their connection. I think we're always connected, but we forget, and the mind starts to obscure that connection. But with a kid like, my middle child, Evangeline, she's 4. So she's just starting to develop that sort of mindset and to become sort of programmed, if you will. So yeah, I learn a lot from my kids, a ton.
Well, let's talk about children. In the book of Exodus, Moses helped the Jewish people leave Egypt. They went out across the desert for 40 years. But God forbade them from entering the promised land. Only their children could enter. None of them could enter, not even Moses. But their children could enter. The older generation represented the old ideas. The children represented new thought. New thought can enter paradise.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And again, like, when you tell me about this sort of metaphorical or the symbolic interpretation of that story, it makes a ton of sense.
Well, if you think about the plagues, all of those plagues against Pharaoh represents the intellect. Pharaoh represents the ego. Your ego fights like hell for control. It takes a lot of plagues to beat down the ego.
Yes. That's another great way to look at it, that it always strikes me as kind of sad when people argue about the sort of legitimacy of these stories in terms of literal truth. When you look at it the way that you're describing it to me, it's like, yeah, of course. That makes so much sense.
You have to look at it allegorically. I mean, the king always represents the intellect, always represents the mind. And if you look at the story from the interpretation, then you see, I get it. I've got to overcome the ego.
Right. So in this allegory, what does Moses represent then?
Good question. Well, Moses is the way shower. And maybe Moses was a little bit like Rudra. He's causing the Pharaoh's kingdom to be a little upset. He's playing the role of the destroyer.
Yeah, he's upsetting the balance. And casting doubt across sort of the mind's rule, right? I mean, sort of saying maybe there's more to this than just this thinking apparatus.
But that's just my interpretation of Exodus.
Honestly, I have my own little crackpot interpretations of biblical passages, and to me, they just make a lot more sense when they're regarded allegorically. Like the Garden of Eden is a great example. Obviously, I find great wisdom in that story, but only if you look at it metaphorically. If you tell me that the earth is 6,000 years old and that these are actually my ancestors, then we've got a different story on our hands. But so where did you pick up sort of some of this? Because I mean, in your book, you talk about Jung, you talk about how the kids are, again, they interpret these archetypes intuitively. Did you ever study Jung? Did you ever study people like Joseph Campbell, for example? Or is this just something that you've come at in your own way?
Well, I did study Jung at the university. When you get a degree in consciousness studies or work toward that degree, there's a requirement for psychology and religion and philosophy. And so I have a number of books in my library on Jung. Um, and certainly as a father and a parent, I understand fables and I understand the message that they carry. And I always understood them as a child.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that you grasped that sort of intuitively. And for me, I didn't never started regarding myths as anything other than just sort of primitive stories until I encountered Joseph Campbell when I was like 14 or something. But to me, they were always like almost like fantasy stories, you know, like Lord of the Rings. All the myths reminded me of that sort of, gave me that same sort of feeling. So I was always into them for that. But then I discovered there's a whole nother layer to them.
Well, it's kind of like lyrics. If you listen to lyrics on the radio, there's a lot of sublime messages in lyrics
Hmm.
and poetry and literature.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? I know I've been listening to a lot of songs from my youth, and I'm picking up all these different things that I never heard before. It's a very interesting.
It's kind of like listening to the Moody Blues.
Mm.
The if you follow literature, we used to sit around campfires and we'd tell stories, and we didn't have books, and we didn't have computers. And so the wisdom was passed in stories from generation to generation. Well, those stories, finally, one day, some of them got written down and it became our literature. But those stories carried the wisdom of those cultures. And literature still carries that story.
Yeah, and do you think that basically from telling these same stories or similar stories for, you know, hundreds of thousands of years, that's sort of how those archetypes got embedded in the unconscious?
Maybe there's a universal consciousness that we all tap into.
Hmm.
Maybe it's present, and on some level of our awareness, we're connecting. But look at Beowulf.
Hmm.
I mean, look at some of this great literature. I think consciousness continues forever, but during life and after life. And I believe that when we come into this world as an embryo, we bring that consciousness with us. We never lose it. And the wisdom we gained in previous lifetimes, we bring with us. And we start where we left off.
Mm.
So we don't exactly start our first breath at ground zero. We start wherever we left off before. Of course, we've got to learn to walk and talk again, but quickly we get back to our previous level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting theory. What makes you think that? Have you had experiences that sort of indicate that to you, or is it based more on your sort of research and your experiences in the academic world?
Well, I came into this world with a great deal of awareness. I was psychic as a child. I've always had more understanding than the people at the church.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you say psychic, do you mean read minds, predict the future, or sort of specifically what does that entail for you?
Well, for me at that point in my life, it was more premonitions that I recognized as being different.
Mm-hmm.
I talk to my spirit teachers on a regular basis. There are people that are deceased entities that are in spirit that are guiding me.
Mm-hmm.
My ancestors are in spirit. My mom and dad. I talk to my mom and dad on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
They have consciousness.
Yeah.
They communicate to me now the same way they did on Earth. So how can I deny that they have consciousness?
Yeah, so it's experiential in your case. It's not something that you believe. It's something that you've actually experienced directly, and you felt it, and you feel it on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, just a normal part of my life.
Yeah, very cool. So when you talk to these people, whether it's your parents or your spirit guides, do you have to enter a meditative state, or is there a process involved, or is it just kind of part of your everyday consciousness?
Well, in my case, it's part of my everyday consciousness. Of course, I learned meditation many years ago. When I want to quiet the mind, I just say quiet the mind, and it's instantly quiet.
Mm.
Now, normally my method of hearing is telepathic. Sometimes I hear voices, but most of the time it's telepathic. I went out and had breakfast at the cafe with my dad recently, and I was having some emotional issues. And I said, Dad, life kind of is crappy right now. Well, my dad told me, go to the milk barn and milk. Well, my dad was a farmer. What he was telling me is focus on your work, don't get lost in your emotions.
Mm.
And I thought that was great fatherly advice.
Yeah. Wise man. So there's another story in your book that I've read that is about, I think it was a child that was in distress, and you almost like felt them calling out to you from somewhere in the store, and you went to this aisle and there was the kid and they had some kind of illness. Is that, am I getting that right?
Well, I was in a grocery store with my children. It was summertime. We were buying ice cream cones, and an infant came to me in spirit and asked me to come to the milk department. Well, got the kids settled, got them ice cream, and we headed to the milk department. Well, when I got there, there was an infant in a basket with spinal bifida and possibly some other issues. And I could recognize that from looking at the infant. Well, the mother looked at me, and I was looking at the infant. So I spoke to the mother, asked her how she's doing, and she said, well, we're almost bankrupt from these medical costs. And I said, well, I'm a Shriner. We have 27 free hospitals. Let me help you. And I connected her to the hospital for free service.
Wow.
But this infant saw me walk in the front door of the store, and he recognized the light around me. And so he reached out to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at the point now where I've seen and I've felt and I've experienced too much to be skeptical to the, or closed-minded, I guess. I'm still skeptical of certain things, but, a few years ago, these kinds of stories I would have gotten red flags from, but honestly, I don't know anything. And if you tell me that that's what happened, I firmly believe you, man. I've seen some crazy stuff and I've experienced crazy things. So to me, it's just like, I don't understand it, but I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised.
The understanding is being awake. The understanding is being open to psyche. The understanding is hearing, keeping your mind listening. I was in my home. My daughter was 22. She lived with me. A baby was in the house around me constantly in spirit for about 30 days. I didn't know why. And one morning at breakfast, my daughter said, Dad, I'm pregnant. Well, I was so happy to know who this baby belonged to that I jumped up and hugged her. I mean, I wasn't upset that a 22-year-old was pregnant. I was just thrilled to know that this baby that's been in the house belonged to her.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah. And I mean, there's no way that you could know from, she wasn't showing, obviously, and it would have been before morning sickness and all that stuff. So it's just crazy that you heard or felt the baby. I mean, that's nuts. I love hearing that. That's crazy.
Well, you can feel the presence.
Yeah.
And you can tell that they hang with you and they stick with you.
So is it, because I'm trying to think of my own experiences and my own sort of unexplainable things, things that have happened or that I've experienced that I can't explain. And it always feels to me like it has to do with intuition. It has to do with the mind not getting in the way and with you being totally open to what you're feeling. And, you'll just get these sort of messages. I mean, so is it really rooted in the intuition for you, or is it something different?
Actually, to open the psyche, you've got to go beyond mind, beyond intellect, to a higher level of silence where you connect with the divine and you connect with psyche. You got to get the intellect and the mind and the ego out of the way. Mm-hmm. It requires entering into the silent voice of God.
Yeah, I've heard some theologians refer to it as that still small voice within, right? I mean, that's the voice that you're referring to, the intuitive capacity to know things that you can't possibly know with your mind.
Well, that's the difference between a believer and a knower.
Yes.
A believer hears something on Sunday and believes it. A knower has a personal experience and knows it.
Right.
A knower is a mystic.
Yes. Yeah.
A believer is a follower.
Yeah, the mystic has experienced oneness, because I mean, I know people who agree with that sort of principle or sort of in the intellectual way, where they go, yeah, everything is connected, sure, everything is one, but to feel that is a different level of understanding.
Well, it's like philosophy. Most philosophy professors teach philosophy, but they don't practice philosophy.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. Well, and I even had a philosophy professor tell me in my first year at college that philosophy is the love of knowledge, philos, Sophia. And then all these years later, I come to realize Sophia is wisdom, and wisdom and knowledge are very different things. And this guy was, basically peddling, I don't know where he got that information from, but he was my professor. So
he was a little misinformed.
Yeah, a little bit, but a lot. Oh man. So okay, so you're a child, you had this experience, and at that point you had already had psychic phenomena occur to you, right?
When you're a child, you're psychic and you don't know it. You think everybody's this way.
Yeah, and then it just kind of goes away.
But when you get older, you look back and you realize, I was different.
Yeah, so all along you sort of had no idea that you were different, but you had these things happening. Then you had your big epiphany moment, your mystical awakening when you were about 13. And what happened after that? Where did you go from there as a 13-year-old surrounded by, sort of mainstream Christians?
Well, I stopped going to church. I kept reading the Bible because at that time in my life, that was the only holy book I had. Mm-hmm. But I kept my mind open to new knowledge. About 21 or 22, I discovered Manly P. Hall. Mm-hmm. And I discovered his book on, I forgot the title, his big book.
The Secret Teachings?
The Secret Teachings. And I began to follow Manly P. Hall. Also, when I was 22, I was listening to the radio, and I heard a message from the Unity Church, and I could listen and tell that those people were awake, and they were saying a message that I could agree with.
Nice.
So I began to see some other avenues.
Right. So tell me about the Unity Church. I don't think I've ever heard of them before.
Well, they're out of Kansas City. Charles Fillmore was their founder. They're open to all religions. They're open to all wisdom. They teach Christianity in the teachings of Jesus, but not literally. They teach it allegorically.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And how long have they been around for?
The early 1900s.
It sounds virtually identical to, well, not identical. It sounds very similar to the church that I go to, which is a Unitarian Universalist church.
I think they would be similar. Yeah. The Church of Religious Science is also, the Church of Spiritual Living, what they now call themselves, is similar. And that's based on the teachings of Ernest Holmes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Science of Mind.
Science of Mind.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that's probably the only thing I read by Ernest, but it's funny when, this might sound arrogant, but when you get to a certain point, you can almost detect immediately whether this is going to be in your sort of wheelhouse or not, or whether it's going to, resonate with you or not. And I read Ernest and I'm like, yep, I'm with it. I'm picking up what he's laying down. And I like his style.
Yeah. He was on the mark.
I think so. More than not. I mean, I don't know that anybody is 100% on the mark, because anytime you try to capture these things in words, you're going to miss some of it. The words are not good enough, but yeah, he understood.
Well, I think these messengers are pointing the direction of a path. It's up to us individually to choose our path.
Yeah. And not to be bamboozled by the sign.
I don't join organizations.
Yeah.
But I practice my own universal faith.
Yes. Yeah. So are you not involved with the Unity Church anymore then, or do you still have some involvement?
I've attended them for years, but I've never joined the church.
I see. Interesting. And what's your reason for that?
Well, I've studied the Egyptians and the Greeks and the Persians and the Hebrew and the Hindu and the Buddhist and the Taoist and the Christians and the Native Americans. How can I choose among them?
Yeah. Well, like you said, it's more for me anyways, it's more a place to practice my universal philosophy, right?
Well, they allow me to teach. It's a great place to meet kindred spirits.
Very nice.
But I don't really want to vote on their church policies.
I see. Awesome. So yeah, so now you're teaching through this church, but you're also teaching independently through other avenues, or?
Well, I sort of stopped teaching while I've been writing this book. Now, this past year, I taught 18 classes, but I've decided to delay that and maybe start focusing more on internet. I mean, classroom teaching is beautiful, but instead of teaching 6 students, maybe if I do the internet, I can reach 50.
Especially if you do it like in a webinar type format where people can talk to you directly, you know, in real time, right? Because then it's basically like having a classroom, only your classroom is as big as the world.
Well, I'm hoping to start a blog, and I'm hoping to teach kind of a lifetime learning program.
So what would that entail, your lifetime learning program? Would that be part of the blog, or would it be a separate thing, or?
Well, it would be part of the blog, but I would be open to conversation with people at all levels.
That would be interesting. And that would be a good way for you to not advertise, but put excerpts of your book out there for your sort of readers, right?
Yes. It would be a connection. I don't think you can gain enlightenment in a weekend workshop.
I don't think so either.
Now, plenty of people will take your money and promise you that you can. But I think it's a lifetime effort. And the reason I think that is when you gain some new wisdom, it takes a moment to enter the mind. It takes a process for your mind to adjust to that new thought. It takes some time to let go of the old belief and replace it with a new belief. So when you gain new wisdom, it might take a month before you really got it. And then it might take 2 years before you put it in practice.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, it's funny how you can know something and not act on it for so long, right?
So that's why I say that the spiritual path is a lifetime path.
Yes, I agree. I kind of find it comical that people talk about awakening, like they are awakened, you know, which they may be, but in my mind, the true moment of awakening is death. You know what I mean? You might be waking up the whole way through, but you're not going to be fully awake and realize that this is a dream until you wake up from the dream. And to me, that's the end of your life, you know, in this world anyway.
Well, something that I see is people will have a near-death experience. They will never grow from that moment. That's their moment. And they hang on to it and they say, I'm awakened, but they never grow beyond that moment. They think that's it. It's kind of like a Catholic priest. He awakens his root chakra. He feels the sexual energy. And he has all this abuse that he's imposed because he's never taken that awakening higher to the heart chakra.
Right.
He just stays there at that level.
And that's almost more dangerous than not waking up at all, in a way, don't you think?
Well, it certainly causes harm.
But I think the harm has the potential to reach more people when you truly believe that you've awakened, but really all you've done is sort of, you know, hit the snooze button, right?
Well, to me, awakening's a multi-level process.
Yes, I agree. So what would be the stages, in your opinion, generally speaking, of the awakening process?
Boy, that's a good question.
Are there stages? I don't know, right? I mean,
Well, I think in the beginning, the more you listen to your intuition and trust it, act on it, the more you have it. The more you listen, the more magic you have. So you begin with following your intuition. Then you learn maybe a little meditation. And then you go inside and listen to your spirit teachers. And then suddenly you're getting divine guidance. And then you follow that. And before you know it, the old dogma's gone away, the ego's gone away, and you're walking in the footsteps of God.
Yeah. Wow, that sounds nice. I can't seem to get rid of the ego personally. It always seems to be hanging out. So I decided I would just make him my friend, and
Well,
just keep him in cuffs. Keep my eyes on him at all times.
well, actually, we can never lose the ego. That's our survival system.
Right. There we
But
go.
but we can diminish
Yes.
its influence.
Yes, absolutely. And that begins with awareness, because if you don't know that the ego is in there wreaking havoc, how are you ever going to take steps to wrangle the ego and get control over it, right?
Well, to be honest, the only way to do that is to quiet the mind and let the ego fade away.
Mm-hmm.
But for most people, that's too difficult. So what happens is people have a dark night of the soul experience, maybe an illness, maybe the loss of a loved one. In my case, it was a shamanic initiation.
Hmm.
These things knock us to our knees. And when we're knocked down to our knees, our brain's not helping, our body's not helping. All we can do is surrender and lift up and ask God for help.
Mm.
And in that moment, we form a new connection with God.
Yeah. And that sort of fits the pattern, doesn't it, of the death and the rebirth, right? I mean, dying
It's
to
the
the
hero's
ego.
journey. It's
That's
the
right.
hero's journey.
Yeah, beautiful. And it's sort of a pattern that fits our lives. Our lives fit the pattern of the hero's journey in so many ways, doesn't it?
Well, talk to people who've lost a loved one. Talk to people who have been addicts and been down on their knees. Talk to people that have had a life-threatening illness. The ego can't save you. And as soon as you figure out the ego's not going to save you, you start asking God for help.
Hmm.
You really don't turn to God until you're forced to.
It's very true. Even what do they say about the atheist in a foxhole? There's no atheist in a foxhole. When it comes down to it, everybody prays.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I agree. It's true. I mean, I even myself as a young person, I remember not having any belief in God, but if something really, really scary or bad happened, I'd give it a shot. And come on.
Well, that's when most people turn to God. It's when they don't have any other choice.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll turn to narcotics, they'll turn to alcohol, they'll turn to anything first.
Mm-hmm.
But when they run out of choices, there's no place left but to reach up.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I agree with you, and the mechanics of it for me are what's not suspicious, but I'm undecided. I'm undecided on whether really what you're doing when you're praying is you're praying to the highest self within, and that's really what gets awakened and helps you in life because you are it and you realize that.
If you think about each of us, we are each created by a divine spark. That God, whatever God that created us, is connected to us. It's our higher source. It's our higher guidance. It's within us. When we reach up for help, you could call it your higher self, but it's our divine source.
Yeah.
Now, there's many star systems in the universe. All of us are probably coming from a different star system. Everybody probably is created by a different God. There's many gods. When you say God, you're referring to the collective, but that connection we have never goes away, but we don't always call on it.
Mm. And we don't always know it's there even.
The love within us comes from that source.
Mm. Yeah, and that's what all the mystics say too, right? I mean, you read Rumi and he talks about the lover and the beloved, right? And how they're one and the same.
That's right.
Yeah, very interesting.
See, in the journey downward into manifestation, we descend. And then in the journey upward to connect with the divine, we ascend.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the experience of life, of living on earth. Descending, and then the search for ascending.
Mm-hmm. And that's, again, the hero's journey, isn't it?
If you think about creation, when we were created as a divine spark eons ago, we were naked. And the angels took flesh from their body and clothed us. And we were in the mineral state. In eons of time, we entered the plant state. And eons of time, we entered the animal state.
Mm-hmm.
And then eons of time, we entered the human condition. It's like our brothers and sisters, trees and animals, are on their journey to one day evolve to where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to evolve to become angels.
Mm-hmm.
Evolution never stops.
Yes, and I've heard that model of consciousness before, the mineral, the vegetable, the animal, and the human, and that's another common sort of motif that's found in many traditions, isn't it?
Well, I found it in theosophy, which
Mm-hmm.
you could call a philosophy or a science, but it's not an uncommon belief.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like the more I learn about this stuff, the more I discover new people. Well, new to me, I mean, people that have been around for centuries in some cases, but these people have been around us and they've been spreading the good news for literally thousands of years. And do you feel that they've collectively made it any progress? Like, are we any closer as a species toward this sort of global awakening than we were 100, 200, 2,000 years ago?
Well, if you think about how barbaric humans are, go back 10,000 years and the gladiators, and you go back, do you think we've evolved that much? We still have murders, we still have crimes. Humanity's not evolved very much.
No. So
the internet, I think, is helping.
Yeah. So have these people been not wasting their time, but have they been basically just breaking even? Because, I mean, you can go back thousands of years and just start listing, these types of messenger folk who were trying to get us to look inward, get us to see the lack of reality that we attribute to the external world. All these people have been trying to give us the same message over and over again. And why are we getting it?
Well, think about the mystery schools and the Eleusinian mysteries of the Greeks. To be an initiate of the mystery school, you had to know astronomy, you had to know astrology, you had to know philosophy, you had to know mathematics just to enter.
Mm.
And then you had to take a vow of 7 years of silence.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
what? Less than 1% could enter? Look today. What's the percentage? Do we have 1% that's conscious?
I hope we have 1%, but I don't know. That's why I'm asking. I'm interested to hear your opinion. You've seen a lot. You've been around for a while, and you've been into this for a while. Have you seen a shift in the last 30 years, a noticeable one, or is it more business as usual?
Well, we have people that make money like Wayne Dwyer and Deepak Chopra that are out there with their business plan. It may be helping people, but you're giving them chocolate milk.
Very true.
I mean, these people drink milk. You've got to go deeper to transform, and most people are too lazy.
Yeah, it's funny too, because we talk about laziness. We're talking about inner laziness in this case, because there's no physical effort to going within yourself. I mean, maybe a little bit if you're meditating and you're sitting upright, but for the most part, the effort is a psychological or a mental effort, and people seem to be more afraid of that than physical labor.
How many people have told you, I just don't have time to read?
Yeah, lots of people, but yeah.
The point is, it's not a priority.
Right.
They have time to sit on the couch and drink beer and watch football.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It takes discipline. It takes daily commitment. It takes a daily effort. Most people can't make that commitment. And if you look at the religion, the Western religions, the Abrahamic religions, teach duality. I mean, they teach that God's separate from man. Hell, it takes a lifetime to overcome that belief.
Yeah. And what a harmful belief it is, right?
Now, if you go to the Eastern and they teach non-duality, then you begin to get somewhere. Our world is pretty messed up. Look at our government. Look at our politics. Look at our business. Look at our society. I mean, there's a lot of suffering in the world.
Maybe there's not enough, because you said something earlier that kind of gave me a hint about the dark night of the soul, and what you were just saying about how people have time to sit on the couch and watch 3 hours of football or, you know, whatever, Netflix and chill, but they don't have time to actually do the real inner work. It's because we're so comfortable, isn't it? I mean, if we had those dark nights of the soul on a massive scale, maybe more people would say, you know what, maybe it is worthwhile for me to go within. But right now we have it so easy, and we're so cushy right now that people just are more comfortable doing whatever they feel like.
Well, lightning doesn't strike very many people.
Yes. Yeah, there you go. So the people who get struck, what can they do?
There's two ways to react.
Yeah.
You can react with fear. You can react with anger. You can react with blaming somebody, and you will not learn a thing.
Yeah.
Or you can react by asking for divine help, gain strength, find your faith, then you gain, then you benefit.
Yeah, because even having that sort of dark night of the soul or a near-death experience or an awakening experience like you had when you were 13, those experiences don't guarantee anything, because you could easily have an experience like that, be amazed by it, and go back to business as usual and never think about it again.
That's true. It has to move and touch you.
And in your case, you immediately were hungry for more. You wanted to learn more about it. You wanted to study. You left the church. You did things. You didn't just go back to being whatever you were before. You proceeded. You followed the path that was revealed in that moment. I think a lot of people are afraid of the path, and they might see the path in a moment or two, but they're not going to follow it.
It takes courage to put your foot on the path. And then you have to be willing to take the next step and the next step. And you've got to be willing to let go of your old beliefs. And then you've got to let go of your comfort zone. And you'll probably lose half your family and most of your friends.
Yep.
It's not easy to follow the path because you change. You make a lot of changes.
Well, and then there's that moment, I think, that most of us get to when we realize that there is no destination and the path just keeps going. And I think if you had the preconceived notion that you were on the path to get somewhere and you realized, well, there is no getting anywhere, the path is the destination, that could be really disheartening for someone.
I hear people tell me all the time, I'm struggling to get to the top of the mountain. And I tell them, you see a mountain, I see mountain ranges.
Yeah, there's no mountain in isolation, right?
There are so many mountains.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting because for me anyways, there have been many times over the last few years where I thought I finally got it. And those were always preceded by like big falls, like dark depression or big setbacks or whatever. And it's always whenever I think I've got it all figured out that I have these types of dark nights. So for me now, I'm trying to always remind myself, like, there's nothing to figure out. You're just living. Just keep moving one step at a time, right?
The way I say that is God gives me all I can handle all the time. I have to take care of business right now. There is no tomorrow. I cannot procrastinate. As soon as this problem's solved, I'll get two more.
Yeah, exactly.
A spiritual person cannot procrastinate.
Yeah, very true. Well, and the other thing too is you can get rid of all those problems by looking at them in a different way and seeing that they're not problems. They're just the circumstances that are in front of you right now. You know what I mean?
You could look at them as opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, in the East, somebody may go into a cave and they may live in the cave 20 years and meditate. but they're not in the world. They're not facing decision making. They're not facing unhappy neighbors. I think you have to live in the world. I
Yes.
think you have to polish the stone in the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's what Krishna tells Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, I believe. He tells him straight up, some people think that the path of contemplation and the path of action are separate. Those are fools, because
Exactly.
you can't escape, and you can't, there's no way out of it. One path leads to the other. So I completely agree with you. Trying to be sort of a hermit and to cut yourself off and to get away from the problems doesn't go anywhere, and there's nothing spiritual about it, in my opinion.
Well, it's a great way to have a personal experience, but you're not challenged.
Yeah, it's a temporary state. You don't live there. You might go for a few days, or like Jesus, right? 40 days and 40 nights, but you always come back to the world, because otherwise what was the point of going out there in the first place?
Exactly.
Yeah. And again, I keep coming back to the hero's journey, because it's such a all-encompassing pattern, right? I mean, whether it's Jesus going out into the wilderness and coming back, or it's Beowulf or Gilgamesh, all of these stories have a lot in common, and I think they can teach us a lot about our lives.
I agree.
Well, especially having studied Manly Hall, I'm sure you've got a wealth of information on those topics alone.
I read over 250 of his publications.
Whoa. I didn't even know he made that many books. That's amazing.
Well, some were pamphlets, some were notes from classes, some were essays that were never published. What I learned from Manly P. Hall was he was sharing wisdom, and reading his work, I learned a way of thinking. I learned a perspective. I learned his teaching method of understanding, comprehension, awareness, perception, a way of thinking, and somehow it just transferred right from the book to my mind.
Well, I think it probably was in your mind to begin with, and this was just your way of, it's almost like looking in a mirror, right? When you feel a certain way. And
he was a brilliant man, and I think I just really was drawn to his writing.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny how different authors speak to different people, right? I had the same experience when I read the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. I just remember reading a passage early on in the book and going, it felt like coming home. You know what I mean? Like, it felt like, oh yeah, so he told me what I had felt and believed in my heart for so long, but I had never been able to put it into words, and then it was just there. And it was just like, oh yeah, there it is, assimilated, right?
Well, I think a good writer puts into words the unexplainable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's the work of a good writer, isn't it? And that's why metaphor is so useful, because especially in what the topic of discussion today, I mean, it's hard to put into words experiences that are indescribable. So you have to kind of rely on images and metaphors, and it's like this, or it feels like that. But nothing ever really nails it perfectly.
It took me a long time before I could speak about my experiences. But when I started writing, I had to have the courage to reach inside and bring those feelings out on paper.
And when did you start writing this book?
About 4 years ago. And part of that effort was the university experience. Because when you're working on your master's, you've got to write essay after essay after essay after essay. And they're challenging. And that sort of pulled things out of me that I had not talked about or not thought about. So the university experience helped me in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it forces you to
because
go
it
within,
forced
right?
me to start putting things. It forced me to put things on paper.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny how that's. Go ahead. Sorry.
About 10 years ago, I decided to walk out of the library and start sharing my knowledge and start teaching classes. So that was a good step. And then with the university, I took it one step further, and I had to start doing a lot of writing and reflecting and contemplating. So it's all been a growing experience.
I find that writing things down helps to objectify them and make them concrete. And so you gain a lot from writing things about your past or writing about experiences. You gain a lot of insights that you probably wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
Well, when you're trying to find a way to put it in words, sometimes you have to work at it. Now, every class I've ever taught, I've handed out the written material because I figured if it's worth speaking, it's worth writing.
Mm-hmm.
And if they have a 1-hour class, give them the document. A week later, they may want to read it again. They might get something more out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of the only ways you can really make the psyche concrete or material is to try to write about what's in your head, right?
Yes, and if you're going to come to spend an hour with the teacher, you might as well have their talk written so you can take it home and read it.
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of convenience, if anything, right?
Well, if it's worth saying, you should at least have a copy.
Yeah, very true. So what are some of the topics that you taught, or what are some of the classroom topics that you addressed?
Well, I taught one class called Dream Wishes.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about what is it that you dream, that you think about, that gets your attention. Do you want to start a business? Do you want to go travel to another country? What dream do you have that will not let go?
Mm.
Now, how do you pursue that dream? How do you manifest that dream? Well, you have to hold it in mind. You got to focus your attention. You can't be distracted by other thoughts. The manifestation secrets will come to you bit by bit by bit. And as you follow those suggestions in your mind, it'll manifest.
Mm.
But it's like a person says, I'm not successful. Well, they tell you 8 of their ideas, but they're competing.
Mm.
Well, spirit can't help you with 8 ideas. Now, if you'll narrow that down to one,
Mm-hmm.
spirit will get behind you.
Right. It's focusing intent, right?
It's focus and attention.
Yeah. Because if you've got your attention spread out between 8 different ideas, you're not going to make much progress.
None of them will manifest.
Right. Interesting. But I mean, in terms of manifestation, there's more to it involved. I mean, there's a lot of actual working involved. You can't just think about it.
Well, look, we're God's footsteps.
Mm.
We may get the idea, but we have to make the effort.
Yes.
I mean, we have to open the bank account. We've got to get the business logo.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to go get the stationery printed. I mean, you can't sit in the house and wait for Jesus to put a check in your mailbox.
That would be nice, though. Yeah, that's funny because to me, watching the movie, you probably watched it, the documentary, I think it was called The Secret, and it was all about the law of attraction.
I didn't bother watching it.
Okay. Well, you didn't, yeah.
But my feeling is that many people teach prosperity.
Uh-huh.
And they say it's all affirmation. Well, that's part of it. But where in the hell is the willpower?
Mm-hmm.
You have to have will or nothing happens. Affirmations by itself do nothing. Without willpower, the wheels don't turn.
Yeah, and that's what I felt was a bit off about that documentary, is it was a misrepresentation of something that is legitimate, because I do believe that the law of attraction is legitimate. I think that you do manifest what you focus on, but they made it seem like that's all you got to do is focus on it, and I feel like that's misrepresentation.
They're leaving out willpower.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody has to put in the effort. Look, a marvelous idea will come from spirit. 5 people will hear it. 1 person will invent the new item. The other 4 people will say, look, he took my idea.
Yeah, or he beat me to it.
but they sat and did nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, so who's to blame for that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's so interesting how we just want it to happen, but we don't want to have to actually work for it or do the work. We just want it to fall out of the sky like manna. There were things that you wanted to talk about. You sent me that email. Let me just check real quick here. I want to make sure we address some of those things. I mean, we talked a little bit about life and death. Is that something that you want to go back to and talk more about?
No, I think that we address that.
Yeah,
I mean, I just happen to believe that consciousness continues forever. I think the universe is full of consciousness. I think even an atom is conscious. I think even a rock is conscious. It's a low level of consciousness. It's probably not complex, but I think consciousness pervades the universe.
Yeah, and I would have to agree with you on that one. Especially, it's funny, you conduct thought experiments and you start to question things that you never questioned before. And for me, the idea is that anything that is conscious. So like you said, a rock, well, it might be a low level of consciousness, but the fact that there is something keeping those atoms whirling around and in that configuration of a rock, well, that's the consciousness of the rock.
Exactly.
And it's very simple, right? But it's
the neutron and the proton are moving. There's interaction. There's consciousness.
Yeah. What keeps it moving and what tells the rock to stay in that formation instead of just going poof?
It's like a table. Well, the table may not be conscious, but the atoms are.
Yeah. And so the constituent parts are conscious. You can say that the table is conscious. I mean, it all comes down to your definition of consciousness. And as someone who's done a master's degree in this stuff, you probably are better equipped than I am to answer this question. But, can we even ask, what is consciousness? Is that even a question worth asking?
Well, the scientists are researching that. They're trying to connect it with quantum physics. They're searching for consciousness. Some scientists are looking at the brain and they examine this part and that part, looking for the source of consciousness. And then there are those that study quantum physics, looking for the connection that is consciousness. Well, scientists may never find it, but in my mind, I find it. You find it. We're conscious of drinking a glass of water. That's where we're conscious. And really, the animals are conscious. If you look at the trees, they have systems of consciousness where if one tree gets sick, the whole grove knows about it.
Yeah. That's another level, right?
That's another level of consciousness.
Or how about the flock of birds that knows which way to turn in unison without ever speaking or exchanging any messages, right?
Well, we don't give animals enough credit.
Like kids, we can learn a lot from them, I think.
Nature's intelligent.
Yeah, and it's no wonder that the Taoists and the Stoics said, live according to nature, right? Study nature, study her ways, because she is the greatest teacher that we can possibly have.
Well, mom and dad were our first teachers. Nature is our third teacher. Now, nature's not biased.
Yeah.
Mom and dad might have been, but nature is not biased.
Very true.
Sorry,
thank you.
If you try to swim upriver, you're going against the stream. It's like letting your ego and you're trying to push your way through life. You're going to lose. You can't fight nature.
No.
You've got to go downstream. You got to go with the flow because you're not a big enough man to go against the wind forever.
Yeah, absolutely. You might make a little bit of progress swimming upstream, but you're going to wear out eventually. You're going to tire yourself out before the river gets tired.
Exactly. You've got to go with the flow. And I think when you get in step with the divine, then you go with the flow.
Yeah, I mean, that's what a lot of these traditions are talking about with acceptance. Like as a young man, I used to bristle at the concept of acceptance because it was like, oh, you just want me to take it laying down. But now I see acceptance is going with the flow, right? And it doesn't mean that you're a passive recipient, but it just means that you're not going to fight the things that you can't fight, that are not beatable.
Exactly. It's called discernment.
Yes, absolutely. And that's another thing that the Hindus, they figured that out a long time ago, right? I mean, they had a word for that that special kind of wisdom which helps you to discern between the true and the false, the real and the illusion. And it's something that we don't talk about, but in the world of fake news, this is the skill that, or the quality, if you will, that people need to be equipped with more than ever, isn't it?
Well, let's talk about activists and protesters. When you react to the world, when you react to ignorance with ignorance, there's no change in the energy.
Mm-hmm.
When you react to prejudice with prejudice, there's no change in the energy. It'll go back and forth forever.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you respond with awareness and you look for a solution, there might be an answer.
Right.
But a knee-jerk reaction just perpetuates the debate.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. Yeah, it's funny. Do you think that it's something that's wired into us? Because it seems like we are born with this tit for tat instinct. Like I see it with my kids a lot, for example.
It's kind of like the Old Testament. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now listen to Jesus. Jesus said, turn the other cheek.
That's right.
Now he didn't say be a coward. What he was saying is don't perpetuate the fight.
That's right.
Change the subject.
Mm-hmm.
Move on.
Yeah, it's hard to do, but it feels good when you can manage to do it. You know, when you take the high road, for example, someone is insulting you or treating you badly and you don't go for that tit for tat reaction, you know, it's satisfying in the long run. If you hit them back right away, it might make you feel good for a few minutes, but then you're going to feel shitty about it. But, you know,
well, here's my attitude. If somebody pushes my buttons, I kiss them. I thank them, because if my buttons got pushed, there's something in me that's not healed.
Amen. Yes, that's the way to look at it for sure. Thank you for teaching me. That's what you say to them, right? Thank you for showing this to me.
Everybody's a teacher. Mm-hmm. They're either teaching what to do or what not to do.
Yes. And it's our job as the student to determine which type of lesson it is, isn't it?
Well, it's our job to honor what we can learn from everyone.
Yeah.
Don't look down on the farmer. Don't look down on the vagrant. Look, who knows what footsteps they've taken?
Very true. And your position in life doesn't determine your value as a human being or your worth in any sense, you know, in my opinion. So
value is not measured in dollars.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, money's a real bitch, isn't it? Like, it's such a source of trouble for us, and it seems like it was, you know, it's a convenience. It's supposed to facilitate things, isn't it?
Well, in my life, I just handle money. It comes in the morning, goes out in the afternoon.
That's right. That's all you can do, right?
But in the Western society, that's part of how the Western society works. In the Eastern society, I could have a begging bowl and I could live.
Yeah.
But in the Western society, I need a car, I need a home, I have to have cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
We're a little bit more of a capitalist structure.
Well, and it's the challenge for me is always to, you know, fulfill my obligations and my duties, you know, keep the roof over my head and the food in the cupboard and stuff without getting to that point where money makes me anxious or where I just want more and more of it, because I've seen people go through that and I know people who are going through it now, and I can tell it doesn't bring any kind of happiness or joy into your life.
I know many people who pray. Well, I pray. In my lifetime, I always say, God, just give me enough.
Yeah.
Well, what the hell's enough? Maybe it's 2 houses. Maybe it's 2 cars. Well, that's what I have now. 2 houses, 2 cars. That's enough.
Yeah. That's a good way to look at it.
I never say how much. I just say, give me enough.
Yeah. Yeah, and let him figure out, or let it figure out what enough is, right?
Well, God knows my thoughts. He knows my wants. When I pray, I just use one word, Father.
Yeah, what else you got to say, right?
I mean, he already knows what I'm thinking.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Isn't that funny too? Oh man, there's so many strange things about mainstream Christianity, about, so many contradictions, and that's exactly a chief example. Why are you praying with words? He knows exactly what's going on. You don't have to say anything.
Well, doesn't the Bible say that you go into the closet to pray?
That's right. It's supposed to be between you and God, not between you and the whole church and the whole, cathedral, right?
Exactly. It's a private message.
Yeah.
And really, no words are necessary.
Yeah. It's a meditation, right?
I never pray out loud. I just have the thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, in meditation, to me, it seems like a form of prayer in and of itself. It's silent prayer, right? I mean, you're focusing inward.
Well, for me, meditation's more about listening.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm letting my teachers teach me. That's my listening. That's my school time.
Yeah. So do you hear words, or is it like, how does it feel for you when you're meditating like that?
Well, telepathically, I hear words, sentences, paragraphs.
Interesting. And so who are some of these spiritual guides that you've mentioned?
Well, one of my master teachers is Josephus.
Okay.
Now, if you look back into the first century, at the time of the Romans, Josephus was a historian.
Right.
And he's got a collection of works.
Yep. And so how did you read his works, or did he become your spiritual teacher before you discovered who he was in history, or was it the other way around?
No, he's been my teacher for my lifetime. I only recently discovered his body of work. Almost
crazy.
All Western religious authorities cite him.
Yeah.
He was a religious historian.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with him. Yeah, that's why I'm asking, because it's that's something else that you knew about him telepathically or psychically before you actually discovered his body of work. That's fascinating.
Well, I've been working with him 50 years, and I just found out his book about 2 months ago.
Have you brought it up with him? Why didn't you tell me about your books?
No, I didn't bring it up with him.
So what's their what are they experiencing throughout all of this time? Is there?
You mean my teachers?
Yeah, because they still exist in consciousness form, and so are they localized somewhere? Do you I'm just trying to understand, what is it like for them to be in this state?
Well, there's no time or space in spirit.
Right.
Now, in my spirit teachers, I've been writing a book. I have a lot of authors on my team.
Mm-hmm.
Manly P. Hall's on my team.
Yeah.
Time doesn't exist in spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they choose someone to guide, and we each have spirit teachers, each of us.
Mm-hmm.
I have about 5. Josephus is the spokesman. He speaks for the group.
Mm.
And so it's his voice I'm always hearing.
That's interesting. It must be nice, because for me, I definitely have spirit guides and teachers, but I have to read their books to get their advice. I can't just tune in, which would be a totally different level of experience there. I would love to feel that.
Well, I have a painting of all of them. I know their names. Mm-hmm. I have conversations.
Yeah.
I've seen them in my home.
Huh. Yeah, that's cool. I'd love to be able to do that. Do you think there's a way for someone like me to get to that level of experience, or is it because in your book you do mention something about you suspect that your talents are genetically predisposed, right? Like you got it from your mother.
I mean, I can teach people how to see auras. Mm-hmm. That's not difficult. Okay. I mean, if you learn how to look with the right lighting, you can see apparitions. Mm-hmm. If you train your listening, you can hear voices and speak.
Yeah.
No, you can learn it.
Interesting.
It takes a little training.
Mm-hmm. I actually had one experience, now that I'm thinking about it, that was I went to a group meditation at this little church in my town. And it was right after Donald Trump had been elected. So everyone was in a really sort of dark mood. And we sat around this chalice with a light, and I just stared into the fire for half an hour. And I had silence for the first part, and then I started to have an exchange with Lao Tzu, or he started talking to me. And he started telling me, like, almost like the Tao Te Ching, but it wasn't anything that I had ever read in the Tao. And I tried so hard to memorize it, and I wrote it down when I got home. And it was the only time that's ever happened to me. Now that I really think about it, but it was like he was like reciting a new verse of the Tao Te Ching to me, and it was like I couldn't believe it was happening. And but it's been silence ever since. So maybe I need to sit down and meditate some more.
Well, we notice it in certain moments. If we trust it, honor it, it'll happen again.
Mm-hmm.
If we discount it and close our mind, it won't happen. But if we accept it and stay open, it'll happen.
Mm. So how often do you meditate? Like, do you have a sit-down meditation practice, or is it something that you can do, like you said, at any time when you're driving in traffic or wherever?
I have not sat down and meditated in 10 years.
Okay.
I practice 24-hour-a-day meditation.
Okay, yeah.
I practice mindfulness 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
I keep my mind silent 24 hours a day.
Mm.
I don't allow thoughts in my head. I keep a attitude of silence.
Mm.
So I'm receiving constantly.
Right.
It's almost like I'm channeling my life.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you don't have to meditate because you're in a constant state of meditation.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, you've got discipline and willpower, my friend. That's quite the feat.
Well, it's been a lifetime effort.
Right. Oh, well, that's good. I'm only 4 or 5 years in, so it makes me feel a little bit better, because I feel like I have a lot of moments where I'm there, and then I have lots of moments where I am not living up to my own expectations. So just keep plugging away at it, I suppose.
Well, I learned something along about the time, I guess I must have been about 36 years old. I met some sannyasis that were followers of Osho.
Mm-hmm.
And they practice a meditation, a dance meditation called no mind. Well, you start in the morning and you dance all day. And then tomorrow you start in the morning and you dance all day. Well, after doing that for one entire summer, I got so good at having no thoughts that for the rest of my life, all I have to do is say no thoughts, and there's no thoughts. The no mind meditation trained me to clear my mind and to get rid of the brain chatter.
Wow.
Dance is powerful. Look at the whirling dervish.
That's right. Yeah, it's turning around the circle, right? Or turning around the center. The Sufi mystics and the dervishes have that down pat. That's it. I know, that's a good food for thought. I never really thought about dance as a spiritual practice before. I'll have to look into it.
Well, actually, it's a great meditation. If you let go, see, when your body's in motion, runners have the same experience.
Yeah.
Runners call it runner's high.
Mm-hmm.
Your body's in motion. Your mind focuses on your steps or your breathing, and all the thoughts go away. Your mind is clear. There's no brain chatter. Your teachers are yelling at you, and you're listening, and you're running, or you're dancing.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had lots of inspiration while running. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because it is meditation, right? You're focusing on your breathing and your steps, and the mind is quiet, so you're open.
It's the best intuition is taking a shower, washing dishes, doing mundane tasks. Your mind is clear.
Yeah.
You're not thinking about the doggone checkbook when you're taking a shower.
That's right.
Your mind is clear.
Yeah. Yeah, and it falls right in line with the works of Csikszentmihalyi there, the flow, right? Flow experiences. Have you looked into any of those at all?
No, I haven't. I believe that for mindful and heartful development, that you need to maintain a state of reverence, even doing mundane daily tasks.
But how do you maintain that state of reverence? What's the trick, or what's the secret? Because I can tell myself, okay, Ollie, this morning you're going to be reverent all day, but as soon as I hit the desk or get on the bus or whatever, it just kind of slips away. So do you have a mantra, or what's your secret?
Well, just to have the mental attitude. With love, I do this, and with love, I do this, and this is my way of giving. Thank you, God, for giving me the skill to help others.
Mm-hmm.
It's being mindful.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm going to give that a shot, because that's, like I said, my thing is consistency, because I can go through periods of time where I'm very much grateful for no reason, where I just wake up feeling grateful. I'm, happy and reverent, and everything makes me feel awe and wonder. But then there are other times where I lose it. And so my contest is always to try to keep it,
It's a good practice. Practice makes perfect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, if you didn't have setbacks, then there would be no practice. You would already be there. So I'm not there yet.
But, like you said, 4 years, that's not very long.
Oh, yeah, no, and I, like I said before, I'm at the stage now where I don't feel that there is a destination or a target. Like I'm just trying to live my life, follow the principles that I've discovered that work for me and make sense, and try not to be too hard on myself when I fail, because it's going to happen, and it always does.
Look, mom and dad give us unconditional love. The only other person in the world that can do that is yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And when you can do that, forgive yourself, then you've found your lifelong partner, yourself.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Such a strange relationship to have, isn't it?
Well, really, it's the only relationship you'll ever have. Your wife can never be you, and you can never be her.
That's
You
right.
were born alone, you'll die alone, you live a solo life. Finding unconditional love for yourself means you found your lover.
I've never thought of it that way. That's brilliant. Yeah, very true. Holy. Wow. I think that's a good way to end it, my friend. I don't think we can end on a higher note than that.
Well, that was a good one.
That was a good one. Well, thank you so much for your time. That was amazing.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
Hey, pleasure's all mine. And I would love to do it again, especially after the book comes out, but even before, if you have time and you want to have another chat, I'm sure there's lots more we can talk about.
Oh, I bet you I can think of something.
I like your style. I'm really happy that we did this.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Good night, Ollie.
Good night. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night, Ollie.
Good night. Good night.
Oh, you got a whole crew over there.
The reason I did that, Ollie, is when you have a group of a few enlightened people, the psychic energy of a group lifts up everybody's energy.
Mm.
So by having the presence of some enlightened people adds the psychic energy to me so that I can open my third eye and be more responsive to you.
Well, it seems like it worked really well. So thank you.
It was wonderful.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, enlightened people.
Thank you, sir. You bet.